Hey everyone, and thanks for tuning in to Welcome Home. I'm Barbara Beck, and we have a really relevant and important show for you today. How many of you have prodigals in your life? Those children or even grandchildren who've strayed from the truth and are not walking with the Lord. Our guest on today's program had a prodigal son in her life, and she has tons of insight for us in knowing how to respond with wisdom and grace when a loved one is wayward. You won't want to miss author Judy Douglass's practical insights and steps in dealing with that often long and desperate road of waiting for the prodigal to return. Coming up next, right here, right now on Welcome Home.
Welcome Home with Barbara Beck, a Good Life 45 original production. Get ready to watch hope happen.
Hey everyone, you are in for a blessing today. I'm so glad that you joined us. We have Judy Douglass, who is the wife of Steve Douglass, who is president of what they used to be called Campus Crusade for Christ, which is now Cru. And Judy is a co-leader now of that enormous, incredible organization, as well as director of women's resources. And she has written a book that is going to be such a blessing to you. It is called When You Love a Prodigal. And it's not just her story. In fact, it's really not her story at all. That's why I want her to be here to tell her story. Rather, the book is a 90-day devotional for those days of wilderness that you probably either have experienced if you have a prodigal or are in the midst of experiencing. So this is a book that's going to encourage you and help you with your walk, and Judy is going to tell us all about it right now. Welcome back.
Thank you. So good to be here, Barbara.
Judy, I love having you on because you have such a heart for the prodigal and for those parents who are dealing with the prodigal.
I do.
Because you have a prodigal.
He's doing well.
That's wonderful. So tell us a little bit. Let's go back to the early days of you being married to Steve. Let's start there. Let's start with your Christian testimony. How about that? When did you become a Christian?
When I was 15,
wow,
at a Young Life camp where my friend took me to go skiing and meet cute boys. And so those two things happened.
Was he there?
No,
Steve? No. He was not the cute boy.
He was much later.
Okay.
and so I met Jesus on New Year's Eve
Praise God.
at that camp. And it was real, you know, it stuck. And I was involved in Young Life through high school. And I went to the University of Texas and was quickly finding I wasn't walking well with God by myself. And I said, Lord, I need some help. And he introduced me to Campus Crusade for Christ, which was still fairly young and not on lots of campuses. They were at the University of Texas. And so I was involved with that for the whole time.
What did that look like when you were there? What was it, just meetings? Was it,
it was not a lot different than it is now.
Okay.
It's a combination of like a weekly meeting, which was mostly for the Christians, but a little evangelistic.
Okay.
But most of the evangelism occurred one-on-one with people, and the staff and the students they were discipling would go and would find people they wanted to share with. Some was finding strangers or holding sign-up things that people would sign up for that we could actually talk to them. And then discipling people so that they really were ready for God to say, and here's how I want to use you.
So you had a disciplined life from the time you were 15 on, disciplined in the spiritual
Yes,
world.
definitely.
Right?
Didn't always do it perfectly.
Right. Well, we're still not exactly doing things perfectly. At least I'm not speaking from experience.
Not yet even, but definitely I had my ups and downs, but I was committed and a part of it. So when I was graduating, God said, I want you to go full-time staff with Cru.
Wow.
Campus Crusade. And the problem with that were two. One, I was engaged, and when I talked to my fiance, he didn't think that's what he was going to do at all.
Oh.
And at that time, it was always husband and wife together. It's not always now. And the other thing is I wanted to do a magazine, work on a magazine. And I didn't know that if Cru had something, I just thought I would do what all Cru staff did at that time, go on campus, talk about Jesus.
Right.
And disciple people. But I said, all right, if you want me to do this, yes, I give up the man I love and the dream I've had. And I thought, God drives a hard bargain.
Yeah, that's pretty tough.
And so I I did. I left that man. We're still friends.
Good.
But
Good. Is he a Christian to this day?
He is.
Yes.
And but Bill Bright called me into his office and said, "So you have a journalism degree?" I said, "Yes." He said, "We have this campus evangelistic magazine we're doing. Would you consider coming to headquarters," which was in California at that time, "and working on this magazine?" And I'm like, seriously?
That's your heart. Right.
And so for the next 14 years, I did that.
Okay, good.
I worked on 2 magazines that we had. I had a department of writers and artists and stuff.
Did you write articles, or were you
Yes.
mostly?
I did everything.
Okay, because you're a writer at heart.
I'm a writer.
Yes.
But I was, at first there was just an artist and myself. And so you do everything.
Yes.
But then one of the biggest blessings was I got to help Bill Bright write. And so some of the early materials of our ministry I helped him write, and several books that he did is such an incredible gift from God to get to work closely with that man.
Right.
During that time, Steve Douglass arrived with some Harvard boys, we called them. They were from Harvard Business School, and they were doing their master's research project on Campus Crusade from an organizational point of view. What had happened is the ministry had just exploded, and we had all these new staff, and everybody there was kind of a ministry person, not an organizational person.
Right.
And so Steve and another one of these young men from Harvard came in and reorganized us. And
Now, were they Christians?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
They had been in a Bible study together, and it was just a real gift from God. And Steve and I became friends. And eventually we became more than friends, but we dated for about 5 years before we got married.
And so then you start having these little babies. We're getting to the prodigal that's coming, right? All right.
It's coming. So yes, I had 2 girls, and that was the challenge when you're used to running magazines and departments and stuff, and all of a sudden you're home with our first daughter. Cried for 4 months and hardly ever slept. It was a little challenging. And we were moving on, and I was happy, and God said, "I'm going to send you a son." I went, "Okay." And that didn't happen. I said, "I'm really content."
2 little girls.
2 little girls. We can forget the son. And God said, "Oh, no, I'm sending you a son." Then we moved to Florida. No son. And God says, "Just wait. I have a gift for you." And so shortly after we moved here, a new friend said, "Do you know someone who could take an 8-year-old boy?" And God said, "This is my gift for you."
Wow.
And so we said yes. And
he was 8, and how old were your daughters?
9 and 12.
9 and 12. Whew. You're in the weeds.
Well, he didn't actually get to us for a year because it takes...
But they're pretty close in age.
They're very close.
Yes.
In fact, sometimes it's 1, 2, 3. Well, maybe right now.
Even now, right.
He came into our home first as a foster child for 3 years, and it was hard from the beginning. He came out of a mother with drugs and alcohol who had been drinking and doing drugs while she carried him, which has amazing impact on the brain and causes issues. And there were people, inappropriate people around all the time, and there was abuse that occurred. And so when they finally took him, the grandparents, he stayed with them for a year almost before he came to us, but they said, "We can't do it." So they let it go. And my friend who said, "Can you take this boy?" didn't want him to just drop into the foster care system. So she said, "Let's find one of those new Campus Crusade people here." So we had him, but he had so many issues.
But he was with you for 3 years as a foster child before you even adopted him.
Right, because then they terminated his mother's rights. But, he had RAD, which is reactive attachment disorder, no dad, a mother who chose her addictions, the grandparents who couldn't keep him then.
So that means he's not forming a relationship with anybody.
Anybody.
So
he's
walls.
Got this wall around him, and he kept it.
Yeah.
He wasn't going to let us in. He's sure we would abandon him also.
So did you know that at the time when you were trying to bond with him, or what?
Well, we found out pretty quickly. But no, we hadn't really learned enough. We were just doing what God said to do. And we found out the other issues. He had learning disabilities, just the fact that he didn't always know where the next meal was coming from. So they get stuff and hoard it. And do you know what the most frequent place that homeless or people like him get their vegetables from?
I hope it's not the dumpster.
Nope. Ketchup.
Oh.
Packets from fast food.
Wow.
So in his room, I would find a hoard of ketchup packets. And we took him to church. We had him in school. We got some tutoring for him. He could barely read or write.
Counseling? Are you receiving counseling too?
Not yet.
Okay.
Counseling came a little later.
Okay.
We didn't really think we needed it yet. We probably did. But so that's where we were. And then we adopted him.
Did you have second thoughts about adopting him?
Oh, yes.
You've had him for 3 years, and there is no bond. What would, Judy,
Why would we do this?
Why did you do this?
Well, I was pretty sure that God didn't say, I'm going to give you this son for 3 years. And so in my mind, it's like, I think this is something we're supposed to do. But Steve had a lot of reservations. And
what about your daughters?
Well,
did they have
I'll
reservations?
tell you what they said, because we had a little family meeting. And Steve's like, we have so much responsibility, and he is a distraction. And so he asked the girls. Now, Michelle, who is younger, is a counselor. She probably started her counseling ministry at about 12. And she's a lover of people. And so her first words were, boy, I don't know if we should keep him, but I don't want to be the one to ruin the rest of his life by rejecting him. And you go,
wow,
okay.
What an observation.
Yes.
Yes.
And then Debbie, who was 14, not very spiritual at that point in her life, and really wasn't very fond of her brother. And she'll say, we can't do this. And she said, we just need to suffer gladly. God must have sent him to us. He must have things to teach us. And we're like,
wow,
who is this?
I know.
And for Steve, that was the confirmation that God really was sending him to us.
Was it you, too, your confirmation?
I already had it.
You knew. Okay.
Yeah, I was sure. But I couldn't force the others.
Sure.
They had to agree.
It had to be the
well.
whole family.
And so we said yes. And Josh, who at 12 then, also had to say yes. And because then they get a say when they're 12. And he's like, I don't see any other options.
Oh, poor little guy.
So he came, and we thought, now he'll feel more secure and knows we're not going to abandon him, and he'll do better.
Sure, you would think that.
No, he went into middle school, and it got lots and lots worse.
We're going to hear about how lots and lots worse it got. I don't want our viewers to go away, because the story does have a happy ending. But before we get to the happy ending, we've got a lot of wilderness to go through. You want to stay and hear the rest of the story. We will tell it as soon as we get back from our break. So stay with us, and we will be right back with Judy Douglass.
You're watching Barbara Beck on Welcome Home, where we share life-changing stories of hope.
Welcome back. I'm so glad that you're here with us today. This program is incredibly important for each one of us to hear, especially if you have a prodigal in your life. Judy Douglass, who wrote this book, When You Love a Prodigal, she can tell you firsthand what it's like to love a prodigal and how to do that. You can get her book from the website that's on the screen for you right now. But I want you to listen, continue to listen to her story, because right now we're at the place, Judy, in the story where you have just adopted Josh. You've had him for 3 years as a foster child. Weren't real sure. The family wasn't real sure. Actually, the family was sure. It was Steve that wasn't quite sure until your daughter said, yes, we need to adopt this boy. 12 years old, goes into middle school, and does the sky fall out?
Pretty much the sky began to fall. The combination of his learning disabilities and ADD, he kept his teachers, they couldn't teach with him in the room. So he spent his time in alternative classroom and thought that was normal. And he just gravitated always to other kids, students who were in trouble. And so then he joined a gang.
Wow.
And it was, you know, again, more wrong friends. And we got to know his friends. They would come over a lot and we would love on them, but we didn't know what all was really going on. But they're still junior high, middle school, so they're not free like when you get a driver's license to go where you want and do what you want. But it was really hard. So we ended up putting him in a program, local program, House of Hope, Christian program, and it was the first year they had a boys program.
So he had to live there. That's the place
he lived
that
there,
you live.
but we had to go through a lot of it with him, and that was good because it forced us into relationship, because they made us spend time together.
Right.
And then they also did a lot of good work for him. And he met Jesus there. And it was a very real decision. And when he came home from graduating from the program, he was determined to walk with God.
And how old is he at this time?
15.
15.
And he was there for a little over a year. And well, he comes home and I'm homeschooling him to catch him up to grade level, and then he begs and begs to go back to school. Well, you know, we said, okay, but you know, you have to do this, you can't do this, you know, good parameters. Took him 3 weeks to find his old friends. And it just was lots of bad decisions. So things that went on over the next 15 years almost.
Really?
Maybe just 12, but you know.
Into his 30s? Into his 30s? Or
no, to his late 20s.
To late 20s, okay.
So there were drugs, increasing alcohol, girls, lots of cars. He kind of went through cars. We weren't getting them for him.
How was he getting cars?
Well, he would trade, or he would save some money from doing some work and go put a down payment at a place. And his grandparents gave him a couple, and friends of ours gave him some. And we should have stopped it sooner than we did. But
hindsight's 20/20.
Yes, it is. And so we learned about how to get out of traffic tickets, and we learned about the juvenile detention.
Judy.
And we learned about jail. And it was all hard. And he still didn't really believe that we loved him and that we were not going to abandon him. And he just didn't, and the pain of all his losses in his life were a large part of it. People think they're just rebellious when they do that, and some are. But a lot of them have some kind of trauma in their life that has caused this anxiety
and detachment from you, from anybody. You talk in the book about unconditional love. Do you remember at what point you unconditionally loved Josh?
I do. It's a little unusual. It was actually the night that he received Christ, and they called from the program and told me that he had met Jesus and they'd already baptized him. And I said, okay. And that night, I just was talking to the Lord and praying for him to be protected in his walk with God. And God said, Judy, I'm going to share my love for Josh with you. And it was like he just filled me up with God's own love for this boy. And then he said, you're going to need it.
It's not over
good.
Yet. Oh, wow.
So,
wow.
But it was real, and it kept me loving him, and it kept me choosing to give him guidance, have the boundaries that he needed, place him where he, in a youth group and in the places where he could grow.
Right. But that's a tough balancing act, giving him grace and love, and then also giving him the tough love, the parameters, the boundaries. I would think that would be a really almost impossible balance to.
Well, two things I would say there. First of all, God told me, when you make mistakes with this boy, and you will, and of course I did, make them on the side of grace.
Okay.
And so when it came down to harder decisions, there was always a willingness to give some grace. The other is I have an allergy to the term tough love, because the word tough tends to make people hard or harsh, or it pushes away.
Right.
And I think you have to have firm boundaries and clear ones. You have to have defined expectations and consequences, and we did those things. Yeah. But they also need to know that you love them, that they can't do anything to make me quit loving them. I might not like what's going on. I might not appreciate the decisions, but I will love you through this.
So God did an actual miracle in his life. There's one place in the book, and I know what's so strong about this, Judy, is it is 90 days. People don't need to read a book one time and say, okay, done, I get it, I get what a prodigal is. This takes you through each day how to continue to love unconditionally, how to give grace when you want to kill somebody.
Exactly.
Not literally, but when you're walking through the wilderness days, that's when a book like this will give people hope and strength to go through the journey. And I love at the very end, I didn't go through 90 days of it because I didn't have it that long, but I did look at the end where Josh actually gave some advice on do you remember what he said in his advice?
He does admit he made a lot of wrong choices, but he says there were bad things happened to me, and I did bad things.
Right.
And he said, but God will help you keep going. He will give you what you need. He says, but I always ask for people to pray for me because the road that I need to stay on is narrow and it's easy to fall off.
So he knows that to this day.
And he knows it because he did it.
Yes.
Several times he would come back to a place of wanting to walk with God. And usually it was because God sent someone into his life who was a blessing.
Right.
And then he just couldn't keep it up. His friends, he finally learned that I would ask him, and he says it in there, why would you do these things? He said, because they're fun and my friends were doing it.
Yeah.
And so the importance of good friends is huge to help them at least desire to make right choices.
So was it alcohol or drugs that he continued to struggle with?
It was mostly alcohol.
Okay. Well, see, the thing about, Judy, I think that we make mistakes as parents is telling our children that sin is not fun. Sin in the midst of the sin can be fun.
It certainly can.
The consequences are the killer.
Yes.
But, why did he do the things that he did? Because it was fun. It was enjoyable for a moment. And then to suffer the consequences. So what sort of advice, Judy, would you give to our viewers besides going out and securing this book and going through the devotional, 90 days of devotional days? What would you tell the mother and dad out there today who has a prodigal? Maintain
relationship. You have I can't give you any guarantees. I'm not about to say, if you do this, you'll rescue this child or you'll prevent them from going there, because they have free will.
Sure.
And so I can't guarantee it. But I do know that if I can keep relationship strong and they know that I care and that I love them, I'm not going to abandon or kick them out. There's a way to do that that doesn't reject them.
Right.
Then I have a chance. And if I can keep showing them what love looks like and what grace looks like by the way I treat them. If the words I say, one of my favorite sections in here is called The Voice of Grace, and it's how we speak to them. And
speaking a blessing over them. I love that.
Speaking a blessing is what, yes. And one of the things, because I list 10 things. The first one is obvious. Count to 10 before you speak. But after that, it's like, would you like someone to speak to you the way you're speaking to that person? Would you like somebody to say the words? Or this one I just love. It's, remember you love this person.
Yeah.
And that affects how you talk about them. So the love, grace, mercy in a protected boundary.
Yes.
When he had to move out a couple of times after he was 18, he had consistently not abided by the boundaries that we had. And so we said, "You're choosing to move out." He says, "You're kicking me out." "Oh no, we are not kicking you out. We love that you're here. We're glad to have you. But you have chosen to not respect us in our home."
That's good, Judy.
So,
years and years and years of loving a prodigal. This did not happen overnight, viewers. I want you to be sure that you know that. Judy and her husband and her family suffered for many, many years. And so we can't expect 90 days of doing a devotional to make it turn around overnight. It might, but it might not.
it does sometimes.
But it does sometimes. I love that. Thank you so much for being here with us. Go to your website, go to that website that's on your screen right now to get more information about when you love a prodigal and how you can get through those days of wilderness. And we have more coming up, and we'll be right back. I hope you enjoyed our program today, and perhaps were encouraged by the message of hope. No matter what our wilderness is, God will see us through it. Now, I've never had a prodigal child, but that doesn't mean I haven't gone through difficult times. The principle we need to grab hold of is the same. Regardless of our plight, God is beside us every step of the way. He does His part, but here's an important question. Are we doing our part? What is our part? Well, here it is in a nutshell. Read and study the Bible, pray and seek God. Romans 15:4 says, "For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the Scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope." So how are we supposed to know what's in Scripture, what God has to say to us, if we're not studying it and reading it? We have a responsibility, and ultimately, it will become a joy to read God's Word, hear His voice, and learn to obey His commands. Then what will happen? We'll be encouraged. We will have hope. We can live an abundant life even through the wilderness. I was trying to think of a recent challenge that either I've gone through or someone in my family has gone through to share with you today. It didn't take me long to remember something. My precious daughter, Kristen, and her husband, Chris, have recently had a huge disappointment in their lives. About 3 years ago, they felt led by the Lord to run for political office. They prayed through it as a couple, as a family, and even sought counsel from lots of respected people. It seemed like God was leading them to go for it. Chris has a heart to serve others, particularly the underserved, the marginalized, vulnerable. So his motive was pure. He felt like God was saying, yes. Chris poured all of his energy, tons of his personal resources, and sacrificed family time and work time to run for office. His heart was to be a public servant. But Chris lost the election. He and Kristen struggled to understand why they were led to go through such a difficult season of their lives to fail, lose. Of course, we know that God doesn't waste anything. Much good happened as a result of their efforts to campaign and speak on behalf of the underserved. Many were encouraged by their love and concern for them, and God used that time for His glory. God was honored. That's all that mattered. We don't have to understand everything. We're just called to obey, to seek God's face, and to be grateful. I've never been prouder of my kids. They've handled those wilderness days with grace, wisdom, love, and faithfulness. I believe God is saying to them, well done, good and faithful servants. What more could we want? And that, dear friends, is our note of hope for today. Thanks so much for joining us, and God bless you.
You just watched Welcome Home with Barbara Beck, a Good Life 45 original production. That makes you a part of our Hope team here on Good Life 45, where hope happens.